Here in Washington, Egypt's Ambassador Gorbal also stressed the point that Sadat's policies will be pursued.
The peace that Egypt has started will continue, and the peace process under Camp David will remain the adhered policy of the country.
However, in spite of these early reassurances, Sadat's murder raises some enormously important questions for the Middle East. Will Hosni Mubarak, who lacks Sadat's vision and charisma, be able to withstand the internal and external pressures Sadat has been under? Will the Egyptian masses and the armed forces follow Mubarak or anyone else on the road to peace? Will Israel, if it senses a weakening of Egypt's commitment to peace, refuse to make its final withdrawal from Sinai next April? And if that happens, how will Egypt respond? It may be weeks or months before the answers to any of these questions becomes apparent. Meanwhile, the U.S. has lost an indispensable friend with consequences no one yet dares to calculate. Barry Dunsmore, ABC News, the State Department.
This is John Scali. Top administration officials are planning instant, highly visible moves to bolster the new Egyptian government, including accelerated arms deliveries. A high-level U.S. delegation will visit Cairo in the immediate future to publicly reaffirm Washington's backing in the current crisis. ABC News has been told that these moves will be carefully orchestrated with key allies as a public warning to the Egyptian government's domestic and foreign enemies, especially Libya, the Soviet Union, and right-wing Islamic militants. This tentative scenario is taking shape despite initial belief by U.S. intelligence that Sadat's assassination was the work of Egyptian religious extremists rather than a Libyan-directed plot. Egyptian leaders, however, still strongly suspect a Libyan involvement in Sadat's assassination, tied in with Gaddafi's stepped-up military plotting against neighboring Chad and the Sudan, Egypt's closest friend in the area. Vice President Mubarak flew to Washington last week to plead with President Reagan for expanded and faster arms shipments to defend the Sudan. With Sadat's death, some U.S. intelligence officials believe the new Mubarak government could seek to build up powerful support at home by carrying out what Sadat long favored, a military invasion of Libya. John Scali, ABC News, Washington.
And for whom many members of Congress had a deep personal admiration and affection. All this was reflected in reaction today on Capitol Hill. We have a report from congressional correspondent Britt Hume.
On Capitol Hill, the first firm word of Sadat's death came from Vice President Bush. He told Senate Majority Leader Baker, and Baker told the Senate at 11:30 a.m. There then began a procession of senators expressing their sorrow. Anwar Sadat was much liked and admired here.
My heart goes out to his wife, Jian Sadat, and to his family. I know what they are feeling, and I share their sorrow.
There was, though, the more immediate question of what would now become of the administration's embattled plan to sell AWACS radar planes to Saudi Arabia. Utah's Hatch came out of the White House to say he is now for it.
Been working on certain conditions and certain safeguards, and hadn't made up my mind until this morning. The Sadat shooting did push me over.
I think it would be appropriate for the AWACS proposal to be withdrawn at this point for a period of time. Because I think many of us had an objection or concern about the instability of governments in that region.
Veteran Democrat Jackson said the intelligence community had worried for years about Sadat being killed, and he named a suspect.
I was interested in the fact that Libya announced his death early. They have no diplomatic representatives in Cairo. They must have a good radio.
As for AWACS, an ABC News survey of the Senate this evening concluded that today's events have caused virtually no shift in the opposition to the sale. Britt Hume, ABC News, on Capitol Hill.
Of all former presidents, Jimmy Carter probably knew Anwar Sadat best after so many long days and nights hammering out the Camp David peace accords with him and Israeli Prime Minister Begin. Former President Carter remembered a man he called a best friend.
When he was here in Plains just a few weeks ago, he told me that he hoped to step down as president of Egypt next year, that he thought his work was basically completed, that he hoped that Vice President Mubarak might take his place, that his contribution to world peace would still continue. I don't know how to pay tribute to a man like him.
Former President Nixon called President Sadat a pillar of peace in the world, the embodiment of honor and of loyalty in adversity. Former President Ford said Sadat's presence was absolutely vital to making continuing progress to a peaceful settlement in the Middle East. While the assassination of President Sadat dominated today's news, there were these other developments. In Washington state, 5,000 people remain away from their homes while work crews try to right 24 overturned railroad cars. 7 of those cars contained potentially explosive chemicals. The cars derailed last night and forced the evacuation of a 9-square-mile area around Marysville. In Atlanta, voting was heavy as residents went to the polls to elect a new mayor. Among the top contenders, former UN Ambassador Andrew Young and state legislator Sidney Marcus. There are 7 candidates in the race, and a runoff is considered likely. After half a century, 90,000 pages of evidence from the Lindbergh baby trial were made public today in New Jersey. Governor Brendan Byrne ordered the massive files opened after a lawsuit was filed last week by the widow of Bruno Hauptmann, the man convicted and executed in the case. Mrs. Hauptmann claims the files will prove her husband was innocent. And in the first of baseball's so-called mini playoffs, the Oakland A's defeated the Kansas City Royals 4-0 to take a 1-0 lead in their best-of-5 series in the American League's Western Division.